Welcome to the Infographics with Comments channel. Today we will discuss an infographic titled Croplands, i.e. regarding arable land, published by Visual Capitalist based on the publication of Potapov and others from 2022 in the Nature Food magazine. The world map shows a color gradient of the share of arable land from purple to yellow, where purple is almost 0% and yellow is 100%. Areas with no arable land are marked in black. Please note that a significant amount of land is not used for agriculture. These are either forest areas or wastelands and deserts. We won't know it from the map, but from the base publication we can see that between the years 2003 and 2019, 9% of the world's arable land increased. The largest increases were recorded in Africa, 34%, and South America, 49%. The remaining continents have retained similar cultivated areas over these 17 years. This phenomenon is well presented in the graph of changes in the area of arable land, green areas, i.e. meadows and pastures, and built-up areas. Let's take a look at this map. We notice unevenness in the distribution of arable land. There are several major agricultural centers in the world where the development structure is dominated by arable land, i.e. land where cereals, fodder plants and oil plants can be grown. In other areas, the share of such land is smaller. The share of agricultural areas in individual countries is presented on the map. Agricultural areas dominate the landscape of Bangladesh, India, Ukraine, Moldova and Denmark. Apart from the countries mentioned above, Europe without Scandinavia is clearly greener than other continents, where agricultural areas cover 20 to 50% in most countries. However, agriculture is conditioned by environmental constraints, such as surface topography and soil type. Therefore, let's look at the distributed arable land in the regions. We notice several main areas in the world: the central United States and the central provinces of Canada, northeastern Argentina, India, especially northern India, Ukraine, southern regions of Russia and parts of Kazakhstan, the best quality Solis belt, northeast China. In Africa, northern Nigeria and southern Niger, and central Sudan. In Australia, a belt along the dividing mountains and areas south of Perth. One could also point to Cambodia in Southeast Asia. Finally, a surprise. The most agricultural continent turns out to be Europe, excluding Scandinavia. The share of arable land here is the highest in proportion to the land area. At the same time, modern, mechanized and intensive agriculture prevails in Europe. The intensification of agriculture in Europe is higher than in North America, even though some agricultural chemical companies are associated with the USA, such as Monsanto, which was taken over by the German Bayer a few years ago. This difference is caused, on the one hand, by acreage, but on the other hand by agricultural culture, which is high in Europe. Let's take a look at the graph of fertilizer consumption per hectare. More of them are used in the European Union than in the United States. Agricultural practices, including the use of plant protection products and fertilizers, are an element of this culture. In the United States, the area of individual fields is large, and on such large areas, the economics of cultivation allow for a reduction in the number of agritechnical treatments, e.g. spraying, at the expense of lower yields. And here's an interesting fact: some of the single fields of arable land, i.e. looking from between to between, in western Poland are some of the largest in the world. You can look around the world in Google Earth to observe it and compare it between countries. Now I will say something that may shock you, but please analyze it without emotion. The fertile humus black soils of Ukraine and Russia can produce not only more agricultural produce than the poorer lands of other European countries, but can also produce healthier food because they do not require such high doses of fertilizers as crops in other European countries. In other words, agricultural production in Ukraine and Russia may not only be highly efficient, but it is also easier to grow so-called organic crops there. This can be seen in the presented chart. Despite intensive growth, Ukraine uses twice less fertilizer per hectare than in France, Germany, and Poland. Ukraine plays in the same league as Australia and Argentina. Ask yourself which country can produce healthier food. Farmers know this, European consumers do not. If you see materials on the internet about rotting grain in wagons, or about loading corn after harvest with excavators without proper sanitary regime, it concerns individual situations, or the lack of standards related to the poorly functioning state administration apparatus or the predatory and unstandardized agricultural management in conditions of state crisis. Because Ukraine is in a long-term crisis, the effects of which we are observing. However, apart from what is currently happening and the emotions associated with it, Ukrainian and Russian agriculture have so much potential in the form of fertile black soil that, if properly managed, they will have no competition in this part of the world. They don't have it anymore, and now there is also capital from other countries interested in multiplying this wealth. I don't see any possibility of competing in the production of rapeseed or wheat with Ukraine and Russia, quantitatively and qualitatively. Only destabilization can stop this potential from being unleashed. I am talking about Ukraine because of the protests of European farmers against the import of agricultural products from this country, which are taking place during the recording of this material. But Russian agriculture has more than 5 times the area of arable land than Ukrainian agriculture. The Russians are withdrawing from the more difficult areas further north, where crops were introduced in less favorable climatic conditions during the times of the Soviet Union, but they have focused on the most fertile soils in their southern part, and this is the #1 player in Europe today, which you probably haven't heard about. They have the most arable land next to the USA, India, and China. Such a curiosity. India allocates almost all of its agricultural production to the internal market. The market is characterized by high fertilizer consumption and a large number of small, non-mechanized farms. Attempts to change the structure of farms through regulations are met with strong protests from farmers. By the way, another observation that goes against some popular claims. A small agricultural farm is often associated with the production of healthy food, healthier than that of a highly commercial farm. Well, the opposite is often the case. Control regimes, e.g. for contracted agricultural products on large-scale farms, impose higher standards, including those regarding the use of plant protection products, than on small, uncontrolled farms. The ecological friendliness of smaller farms is an aspect related not so much to the quality of the food they produce, but to the possibility of maintaining a landscape and natural structure that is more conducive to species diversity than in the case of large monocultures. The United States and Canada are self-sufficient in food if they want to be, but they import and export a lot. Interestingly, not only sweet potatoes, but also potatoes from the USA are increasingly found in European supermarkets. China is #1 in the world for some crops, but it uses twice as much fertilizer as European countries. The entire eastern part of China is, to a greater or lesser extent, a region of arable land and high agricultural culture. Australia and Argentina have been the granaries of the South for decades, completely self-sufficient in food, and powerful exporters of agricultural produce to world markets. A few words about Africa. Some of you may think that this is a continent suffering from permanent famine. The facts are different. Many African countries are self-sufficient in food. The situation is slightly different in North Africa, e.g. Egypt, which imports a lot of wheat and consumes the most fertilizers per hectare in the world. Hunger occurs as a result of armed conflicts and disruptions to supply chains and redistribution. Moreover, the best humanitarian aid for many countries to which such aid is directed would be to enable local farmers to sell agricultural produce, e.g. to foreign markets. But the opposite happens. Very small quantities compared to the possibilities, but also a small range of African agricultural products can be purchased, for example, in Europe. You can buy macadamia nuts from Kenya or coffee from Ethiopia. A little more. And through the prism of store shelves, we form the opinion that African agriculture has nothing to offer. The article that is the basis for today's infographic indicates that most African countries are currently at the forefront of countries with the largest increase in arable land areas and productivity growth per capita. For example, Angola, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Zambia, Mozambique, Côte d'Ivoire, the area has increased by over 100% since 2003. Please look at this chart. Africa has the highest rate of arable land growth in the world. At the same time, in Africa, apart from Egypt, the least fertilizers are used in the world. There is so much talk about sustainable agriculture today. I will show you another chart showing the area of arable land per person in a given country. The countries with the largest area of arable land per capita are, for example, Australia, Argentina, Russia and Ukraine. These are the world's grain export powerhouses. They are fully self-sufficient in food and supply the world. At the same time, as we saw in the previous charts, they produce food using less fertilizers than the rest of the world. Poland and France stand out in the European Union in terms of arable land area per person. There are more of them here than the world average. And here's another discovery. On average, Africa has the same amount of arable land per person as the rest of the world. In such a situation, the lack of arable land cannot be the cause of hunger and malnutrition. If you hear about such cases, their causes must be different. Germany, India and China have about twice as much arable land per capita as France and Poland, less than the world average or the African average. Yet we don't hear about famine in Germany. From this list, the least arable land per person is in the Netherlands. These data explain why China, India, and the Netherlands have very high use of artificial fertilizers per hectare. Agriculture there must be intensive to meet local consumption. The last chart I will show you today concerns the European Union. It may seem exotic to you, but the European Union is the most agricultural player globally, as evidenced by the share of subsidies for agriculture, which constitute approximately 1/3 of all expenditures of the EU budget. Agriculture is the largest item on the spending side. Europe is investing a lot in agriculture and will therefore continue to protect the internal market against the competition of other agricultural producers, and you can rest assured about that. Greetings, and I encourage you to watch the remaining episodes on our channel. I invite you to comment on this material in a substantive way.